Welcome back to the Video CPA. I'm Michael Scott. I'm your host for this channel. And today we're going to be talking about inflation. So it's August 4th of 2022 right now, and we've seen some pretty impressive inflation numbers this year. I know my family's being affected by it, and I think other families. But I want to talk about inflation as a tax today and what impact it is going to have on us. So we'll talk about what inflation is, what's the impact of it, and is it a tax, a true tax, and then who benefits from inflation. So let's go ahead and get on with it. We have our two disclaimers here. One's for affiliate marketing, and another is our educational disclaimer. So Milton Friedman basically said that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And inflation really results because governments are printing money and, production is not increased or anything like that. There's not an increase in products or anything like that, or a big one, but so as Friedman says there, the Federal Reserve is creating money out of thin air. They're printing money with no backing, basically. And so Henry Hazlitt, inflation is an increase in the quantity of money and credit. Its chief consequence is soaring prices. And we're seeing soaring prices in the United States right now. And that's why inflation, at least last month, was up over 9% for the year. So let's talk about the impact. Basically, the impact is that prices rise, but your income that you've got to spend doesn't necessarily rise as soon as what the prices are rising, rise quickly. And so you end up falling in the hole because your groceries are costing more. You've seen a much more big in price at the gas pump, and so this is from an article. Both these slides are from an article by Brian Balfour, and at the last of this sentence you'll see the inflation tax, and we'll talk about whether inflation is really a tax or not, but the inflation tax is deeply regressive and harmful policy that has been imposed upon Americans without our consent. Whatever happened to no taxation without representation? And I have to agree with that. I mean, when a government creates high inflation in a country, they're actually creating a way to, and they may not be on purpose, but they're creating a way to pay off debt sooner and to collect more taxes. So whatever happened to taxation without representation? And we've certainly got that going on right now. So, is inflation really a tax? There are a lot of different ways that you can define tax, and most people define tax as something that's passed by a legislative body. Okay, and that could be at the federal level, it could be at the county or the state, county, or city level, but it's usually taxed by a legislative body. Inflation is not passed by anybody. It's not approved by anybody, really. But there are many times when it does affect us because our governing bodies create and print too much money, and it creates an inflationary process. And we're seeing it not only in the United States but around the world right now. So let's look at the following slide and see what inflation has, what the impact is on that. Bob's a Colorado resident. He made $50,000 in 2019. By mid-22, his income had increased to $55,000. All right, but we've got inflation going on in the country, and so if Bob considered inflation in that from 2019 to 2022, in order to stay even with that $50,000 in 2019, his salary would have to be $57,951. And that's calculated through the U.S. inflation calculator that you can see down at the bottom. So he's making 55, but he should, if he kept current with inflation, be making 57,951. So you can see that his standard of living has really decreased, and it's decreased quite a bit. So from the tax standpoint then, he comes in and he gets taxed on the $55,000, even though his earning power has actually dropped, okay? And that's the bite that inflation gives you. I mean, that's the tax that inflation gives you. Now, if Bob had kept up with inflation and he was making the almost $58,000 in 2022, then he would be taxed on $58,000. So you can see that even though he stayed the same, the government is still applying tax to a higher number, which means they're collecting more taxes. And so there are definite beneficiaries of inflation. And of course, the biggest one is our federal government, but let's look at a few others. So before we do that, though, let's look at, the tax code at the federal level does attempt to abate the impact of inflation. So over the, last 15, 20 years, there have been inflation adjustments each year in the code, okay? And they will raise a bunch of different things. So then you've got to ask yourself, the federal government basically operates on about a 2% increase in inflation, unless something happens. Now, a 2% increase is not going to do it this year. Because we're seeing 8 and 9% year-to-date inflation already. So whether the inflation adjustment is accurate or not, we don't know, but probably not. It's either going to be too low or too high, but very rarely will it be right on. And then there are things like Social Security where it hasn't been adjusted since it was passed. So when it was, if you've seen my video on Social Security, when it was passed, it was envisioned that 10% of the population, the older population who was drawing Social Security, would pay tax on it. Now you've got a situation where it's almost 100% because we've inflated the dollars from the time it was passed to now. And almost 100% of people are paying tax on their Social Security. And some are paying tax on 85% of their Social Security. So inflation has really killed us in the Social Security area. And if you're a senior, you need to write your congressman. And then the other fact is that even though the federal government is attempting to abate inflation, many of the states have not. So your state taxes you're getting hit by state taxes a great deal because they haven't inflation adjusted their code. And so that's something that you have to look at as well. So inflation is getting us in a number of ways. And although technically it's not a tax, it is raising more tax revenue for the federal government, and we're paying that tax. So it may not be defined as a tax, but certainly we're paying more tax because of inflation. All right, so who benefits? Those in debt, and the biggest debtor around is the federal government. So as prices inflate and money is printed much more freely, there's much more money in the system, and so those that are holding debt are paid off in inflated dollars, and it's much easier to pay your debts off. So if you've got a lot of debt out there, this might not be a bad deal for you with inflation increasing so much. But if you're an investor and you're holding real estate or stocks, usually, or even something like cryptocurrency or something like that, you're probably going to be not hurt by inflation. But or if you're a high demand worker and you're looking to change jobs, the salaries usually follow inflation by a number of months, sometimes 6 months to a year before the companies will go ahead and make changes for the inflation that's taken place. But if you're a high demand worker and you want to change jobs, you may be better off going to another company who is offering more money than staying in the job that you're in. So But primarily it's those in debt, and the biggest debtor, like I say, is the federal government. They're being able to pay their debts off with inflated dollars, and they're being able to collect more taxes from us. All right, that's how inflation taxes us, and we truly are in a period of taxation by inflation. When we prepare our tax returns for 2022, we're going to be paying more taxes than what we have because of the inflated dollars. And some of us may have kept up with that inflation, so it's not such a bad deal, but many of us have not, especially those that are on fixed income. Now, they're talking about Social Security having a big increase of 5% or something like that this year. But why not 8 or 9? Because that's what inflation is doing. So we'll have to see what happens. But most people are not going to be able to keep up with inflation. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something from it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button and like this video if you did enjoy it. Thank you for watching.